In a quiet little town surrounded by soft hills and wide open fields, there lived a boy who loved the sound of the piano more than anything in the world. His home was small, made of wood that creaked when the wind blew, but inside, it was filled with warmth. His mother worked long hours at a local diner, and his father, who had passed away a few years earlier, had been a kind man who once played the harmonica in the evenings. Those soft tunes were the boy's first connection to music. When he was very young, he would sit near his father's chair, eyes wide, listening to every note. He didn't understand music then, but he understood the feeling it created, the peace that filled the small house when his father played. After his father's passing, life grew harder. His mother tried her best to take care of him, but every month was a struggle. Even then, she never stopped smiling at him and reminding him that his father's love still lived in his heart. The boy often walked past the local community center on his way home from school. Through a window, he once saw an old piano sitting quietly in a corner, covered with dust. It was cracked and out of tune, but to him, it looked like the most beautiful thing in the world. He couldn't stop thinking about it. One evening, when the center was empty, he went inside and touched the keys for the first time. The sound was uneven, but it made his heart race. From that day on, he went there every evening. At first, he didn't know what he was doing. He pressed random keys trying to make sense of the sounds. He watched online videos on an old phone, learning where to place his fingers and how to read the notes. Sometimes he stayed until the janitor told him it was time to go home. People in town often saw him sitting at the piano through the window, practicing until the sky turned dark. They didn't know his name, but they knew his passion. His schoolmates sometimes teased him. They thought it was strange that he spent hours alone instead of playing games or hanging out after class. He didn't mind. There was something inside him that music could touch, something no one else understood. When he played, he felt close to his father again. Sometimes late at night, he would imagine his father standing near the piano, smiling and listening. His mother noticed his dedication. Though she was tired from work, she would sit near him when he practiced at home on a small keyboard that often malfunctioned. "You sound better every day," she would say, even when he hit the wrong notes. He smiled at her encouragement. He knew they couldn't afford lessons, but he didn't need them. The sound of the keys and his desire to improve were enough to keep him going. Months passed and his playing improved. He began to create small melodies of his own. They weren't perfect, but they came from his heart. He wrote little tunes inspired by the sound of rain, the rustling of trees, and even the way his mother hummed while cooking. Slowly, he started to feel that music was not just something he loved. It was who he was. One day, as he was practicing, at the community center, an old man who often came there to fix lights stopped and listened. He stood quietly until the boy finished. Then he said, "You play with feeling. That's something you can't teach." The boy blushed, unsure how to respond. The man asked if he had a teacher, and the boy shook his head. "Keep playing," the man said. "One day people will listen." Those words stayed with him. Whenever he felt tired or frustrated, he remembered them. His hands would sometimes ache after long hours of practice, but he refused to give up. He dreamed of performing on a stage, with a real piano that wasn't broken, in front of people who understood his music. Winter came, and the nights grew cold. The community center's heater often stopped working, but he still went there every evening. He wore his old jacket and gloves, taking them off only when he played. Sometimes his breath made small clouds in the air, but the warmth of his music kept him going. The janitor, who once told him to leave early, began to let him stay longer. The boy's dedication touched everyone who saw him. One evening, while walking home, he passed a poster on a wall near the grocery store. It announced a national piano competition for young musicians. The winner would receive a scholarship to a top music school and the chance to perform in New York City. He stood there for a long time, staring at the poster. It felt impossible. He was just a boy from a small town with no teacher and no fancy instrument. But something inside him whispered that he should try. When he told his mother, she looked surprised. "Are you sure?" she asked gently. "There will be many talented children there. Maybe you should wait until next year." But she saw the fire in his eyes and smiled. "If you want to do it, then do it. I'll help however I can." He spent the next few weeks preparing. He recorded a short video for his application using his mother's old phone, balancing it on a chair in front of the piano. He played one of his own compositions, simple, emotional, and full of heart. When he finished, his hands trembled. He didn't know if it was good enough, but he sent it anyway. Days passed, and he almost forgot about it. Then one afternoon, an email arrived. He read it 3 times before he believed it. He had been selected for the competition's live auditions in New York. His mother cried tears of joy. "You did it," she said, hugging him tightly. "Your father would be so proud." They didn't have much money, but the community helped. The man from the center organized a small fundraiser. Neighbors donated a few dollars, some baked cookies to sell, and even his teacher at school gave him bus fare. Everyone wanted to see him chase his dream. The night before he left, he couldn't sleep. He sat by the piano, gently pressing the keys. The sound was soft and uneven, but it filled the room with warmth. He thought about everything that had brought him to this moment. The teasing, the cold nights, the long hours alone. He remembered his father's voice telling him to play from the heart, and he promised himself he would. Early the next morning, he packed his small bag and boarded the bus with his mother. As the town faded behind him, he stared out the window, nervous but excited. He had never been to a big city before. The roads, the lights, the tall buildings, it all seemed like another world. But he wasn't afraid. He carried with him something more valuable than anything money could buy. His love for music and his belief that no dream was too big for someone willing to work hard for it. When the bus finally reached the city, his eyes widened in awe. Everything looked so fast, so bright, so alive. His mother squeezed his hand and smiled. "Remember, no matter what happens, you've already made us proud." He nodded quietly. That night, as they checked into a small hotel, he sat by the window looking at the city lights. Tomorrow would be the biggest day of his life. He didn't know what the judges would think of him. He didn't know if his simple clothes or lack of training would make them laugh. But deep inside, he knew something no one could take away from him. That music wasn't just about talent or technique. It was about emotion, honesty, and the courage to share your heart with the world. He whispered softly to himself before falling asleep. "No matter what happens, I will play like I always have, but like I'm talking to my father." The city outside continued to glow, and somewhere in the distance he thought he could hear the faint sound of a piano playing. It felt like a sign that his journey was just beginning. That night, the boy dreamed of a stage lit by warm lights, an audience waiting in silence, and his hands moving across the keys with grace. He dreamed not of fame or trophies, but of connection, of sharing the music that had once healed his broken heart. And when morning came, he woke with a calm determination, ready to face whatever the world had in store for him. It was the start of something far greater than he could imagine, a story that would soon reach thousands and remind everyone that true talent is born not from privilege, but from passion, humility, and the courage to keep going when no one else believes. The next morning, the boy woke up before sunrise. The city outside was already alive with noise, cars, footsteps, and voices blending into a hum that felt strange but exciting. He stood by the window for a long moment, staring at the tall buildings that touched the soft pink sky. It was so different from his quiet hometown, where mornings began with birds singing and the wind moving through the fields. Here, everything felt bigger, louder, and faster. He took a deep breath, reminding himself that this was the day he had been waiting for. His mother quietly placed a hand on his shoulder. "You'll be amazing," she said softly. He nodded, though inside his heart was pounding. He had practiced every day for months, but now that the moment had come, fear began to whisper in his mind. What if he wasn't good enough? What if the judges laughed at him? What if they didn't even let him finish? He closed his eyes and remembered why he was here. Not for fame, not for applause, but to honor his father's memory and to show himself that dreams are worth chasing, no matter where you come from. They had breakfast at a small cafe near the Sol Hotel. He could barely eat. The sound of the coffee machine and the chatter of people around him made him feel like the world was spinning too fast. His mother noticed and smiled gently. "You don't need to be perfect," she said. "Just be you, that's enough." Her words made him feel a little calmer. When they arrived at the grand music hall, he froze for a second. The building looked enormous, with glass walls and golden doors that shone under the sunlight. People in elegant clothes were walking in, some carrying shiny instruments, others talking excitedly. Everything about the place felt professional and intimidating. He tightened his grip on the worn folder that held his sheet music. Inside, the hall was even more beautiful. The air smelled faintly of wood polish and perfume. He could hear faint notes of a piano echoing from one of the practice rooms. The sound was perfect, rich, and deep, so different from the old piano back at the community center. He swallowed hard and followed the signs that led to the registration desk. A woman with glasses looked up as he approached. "Name?" she asked, politely. He told her. She glanced at her list, nodded, and handed him a badge with a number on it. "You're in group 3. Auditions start in an hour," she said. Her voice was kind but distant, like she had said the same words 100 times already. He thanked her and walked toward the waiting area. Other contestants were already there, sitting in small groups. Some were practicing on portable keyboards, their fingers moving fast and confident. Others were chatting and laughing. He sat quietly in a corner, clutching his sheet music. He noticed how polished everyone looked. Their neat hair, pressed, clothes, and expensive shoes. He looked down at his own simple shirt and worn-out sneakers and felt small. But he reminded himself that clothes didn't make a musician. Heart did. Then he saw her, the famous piano teacher everyone talked about. She was one of the judges. He had seen her name online many times. She was known for being brilliant but very strict. Some said she could spot a mistake from the first note. Others said she had made young musicians cry with her harsh words. She stood near the stage talking to another judge, her posture straight, her eyes sharp. There was something cold in the way she looked around the room, as if she could already tell who had talent and who didn't. When her gaze briefly landed on him, she frowned slightly, almost as if she couldn't believe he was a contestant. Then, she turned away. The boy's stomach twisted, but he stayed still. He told himself that what mattered was his playing, not her opinion. The first group was called in. The door closed behind them, and soft music started to flow from the stage inside. Through a small window, he could see flashes of movement, the judges listening, the contestants playing. One by one, the performances ended, followed by polite claps. Some contestants walked out smiling, others looking disappointed. Finally, it was his group's turn. As they waited in a line outside the stage, his hands began to sweat. He wiped them on his pants, breathing slowly. His mother gave him a reassuring look from the audience section. "You've got this," she mouthed. He nodded, trying to smile. When his number was called, he stepped forward. The bright lights of the stage hit his face, and for a moment everything went silent. He could see the rows of seats stretching out before him, filled with people, other contestants, teachers, and guests. And at the front table sat the judges, their expressions unreadable. The famous teacher sat in the middle, her arms crossed, her eyes fixed on him. "Next," she said flatly, "please introduce yourself." He gave his name and said he was self-taught. The teacher raised an eyebrow. "Self-taught?" she repeated as if it were a bad word. "Interesting. Let's see what you've got." He walked toward the grand piano. It was the most beautiful instrument he had ever seen, polished to a mirror shine. As he sat down, he could see his nervous reflection on its surface. He adjusted. The bench carefully took a deep breath and placed his fingers on the keys. Before he could start, the teacher spoke again. "You may begin when ready. But remember, this is a professional stage, not a playground. We expect precision." A few people in the audience chuckled softly. The sound cut through him like a blade. He felt a wave of shame rise inside, but he didn't look up. He had come too far to turn back now. He closed his eyes and thought of home, the quiet nights at the community center, the sound of the broken piano, his mother's gentle humming. Slowly, he began to play. The first few notes were uncertain, trembling slightly. But then something changed. The melody began to flow naturally, like a river finding its path. His fingers moved faster, stronger, not from practice, but from emotion. Each note carried a piece of his story, his father's memory, his mother's sacrifice, his lonely nights of practice. The sound filled the hall, soft and deep, wrapping everyone in silence. The teacher, who had been looking down at her notes, raised her head. Her expression shifted slightly, her eyes narrowing in focus. The boy didn't see her. He was lost in the music. For those few minutes, the world disappeared. It was just him and the piano. The sadness, the hope, the love, all of it poured out through his fingertips. When he reached the last part, he pressed the keys gently, letting the final note linger in the air like a whisper. Then there was silence. No one moved for a moment. Then a few people in the back began to clap quietly. It grew louder, spreading across the hall until almost everyone was on their feet. The sound of applause filled the space like thunder. The boy stood slowly, breathing hard. His hands were shaking, not from fear but from relief. He had done it. He had given everything he had. The teacher sat still for a few seconds, then cleared her throat. "That was unexpected," she said finally. Her voice was softer now, but she still tried to sound firm. "You play with emotion. That's good. But your technique." She stopped mid-sentence, as if realizing that the audience wasn't listening to her anymore. They were still clapping. Some were even wiping tears from their eyes. The boy bowed slightly, unsure of what to do. His mother was standing too, her hands pressed together, her eyes shining. For the first time, he felt proud, not because he had impressed anyone, but because he had been true to himself. After the applause faded, one of the other judges leaned toward the teacher and whispered something. She nodded slowly, still looking at the boy. There was something different in her expression now, less cold, more thoughtful. As he walked off the stage, one of the assistants smiled at him. "That was beautiful," she whispered. He thanked her quietly and joined his mother in the audience. His legs felt weak, but his heart felt light. When all the performances ended, the judges left the room to make their decision. The contestants waited nervously. Some were whispering, others pacing. He sat beside his mother, holding her hand. "I did my best," he said softly. "That's all that matters." After what felt like forever, the judges returned. The teacher stepped up to the microphone. "Thank you all for your performances," she began. "It was a pleasure to hear such talented young musicians." She paused, glancing at the boy for a brief second. "Some of you surprised us today." When she announced the names of the finalists, his heart pounded so loudly he could hardly hear. And then she said his name. His mother gasped and hugged him tightly. The room erupted in applause once more. The boy stood frozen, barely believing it. The same teacher who had doubted him had just chosen him as a finalist. For the first time, she smiled, a small, genuine smile. "See you in the next round," she said. And for a brief moment, their eyes met. He nodded, unable to find words. As he left the hall with his mother, he felt the city air on his face again. It was cool and fresh, and for the first time since arriving, he felt like he belonged there. That night, as they walked back to the hotel, his mother looked at him proudly. "You did more than play," she said. "You touched hearts." He smiled softly. Deep inside, he knew she was right. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about sharing his story through the only language he truly understood. Music. And though the journey was far from over, he felt ready for whatever came next. Because now, He knew that even in the biggest city, in front of the harshest judge, a simple tune played from the heart could move mountains. The next day began with a gray sky and a light drizzle falling over the city. The boy sat by the window of the small hotel room, watching the raindrops race each other down the glass. His hands were resting on his knees, but his fingers kept moving as if they were playing invisible notes. The sound of the piano from yesterday still echoed in his mind. He couldn't believe what had happened. He had made it through the first round. The audience had stood up for him. Even the teacher who had doubted him seemed surprised by his music. It all felt like a dream he was afraid to wake up from. His mother came out of the tiny kitchenette, holding 2 cups of warm tea. "You didn't sleep much, did you?" she asked with a small smile. He shook his head and laughed quietly. "I couldn't stop thinking about it," he said. "Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the stage again." She sat beside him and handed him the cup. "You've worked so hard for this," she said softly. "No matter what happens next, you've already made us proud." Her voice was gentle, full of warmth, and he felt his nerves calm a little. The next round of the competition was scheduled for the afternoon. This time, it wouldn't just be about playing a practiced piece. The judges wanted to see creativity, how each contestant could express emotion and tell a story through music. He was both excited and nervous. His heart told him that was his strength, playing with emotion, but part of him feared the expectations would now be much higher. After breakfast, he practiced quietly on the small keyboard he had borrowed from the hotel reception. The sound was soft and tinny, nothing like the real piano at the competition, but he focused on feeling rather than sound. Every note reminded him of home, of late nights at the community center, and of the old piano with its broken keys. He didn't have the best instrument back then, but he had always played with love. That thought gave him courage. When it was time to go, they took a taxi through the crowded streets. The city looked alive despite the rain. People hurried with umbrellas, cars splashed through puddles, and neon signs blinked through the mist. The boy pressed his forehead against the window and tried to steady his breathing. He could feel his mother's hand gently squeezing his arm. "You're going to be fine," she said quietly. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The hall looked even bigger today. There were more people, more photographers, and more energy in the air. The finalists had been announced everywhere, on posters, social media, even local news. He didn't realize how big this event really was until now. As he entered the backstage area, he saw other contestants again. They were warming up, chatting with their teachers or adjusting their formal clothes. Some nodded politely when they saw him. Others barely looked his way. He found a quiet corner to sit and go through his notes. His fingers felt cold, but his mind was clear. He knew what he wanted to play. It wasn't a famous piece by a great composer. It was something he had written himself, a melody about hope and loss, about finding light in dark times. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And that, he believed, was enough. The teacher who had doubted him walked past just then holding a clipboard. She stopped when she saw him. Her sharp eyes softened for a moment. "You again?" she said, almost to herself. He stood up quickly, unsure what to say. "You surprised a lot of people yesterday," she continued, "but today will be harder. Emotion is good, but it's not everything. Control and technique matter too." He nodded politely. "I'll do my best," he said, quietly. The teacher studied him for a moment as if trying to understand what gave him such quiet confidence. Then she said, "We'll see," and walked away. Her words weren't cruel this time, but they carried a challenge. He didn't take them as an insult. He took them as motivation. When his turn came, he stepped onto the stage once more. The hall felt both familiar and new. The same grand piano stood in the center under the bright lights. The same faces were in the audience, but now there were more cameras and whispers. He sat down, placed his hands gently on the keys, and took a deep breath. He began to play. The first notes were slow and soft, like rain tapping on a window. They carried sadness, the kind that doesn't need words. The audience went quiet, listening. The melody rose and fell like waves, gentle at first, then stronger, filled with emotion. He played as if speaking to someone far away. His father, perhaps, or his younger self who used to sit alone at the broken piano. The teacher leaned forward, her eyes fixed on his hands. There was something raw and beautiful about the way he played. It wasn't perfect. There were small mistakes here and there, but they didn't matter. His music had something deeper, sincerity. It felt alive. When he reached the middle part, his fingers moved faster, the notes becoming brighter. It was as if the sadness had turned into strength. The melody filled the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. Some people in the audience closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. Others simply watched, amazed at how such a young boy could play with so much heart. And then came the final notes, soft, almost like a whisper. The music faded, leaving behind silence so complete it felt heavy. No one moved. Then, slowly, the applause began. It grew louder and louder until the whole hall was standing again. The sound was overwhelming. He stood up, bowed slightly, and looked toward the judges. The teacher didn't clap at first. She just looked at him with an expression that was hard to read. Finally, she smiled, a small, genuine smile. Then she joined the applause. He left the stage feeling like he was floating. Backstage, his mother hugged him tightly, tears in her eyes. "You did it again," she whispered. "You made them feel it." He smiled, but there was something in his heart that made him quiet. It wasn't pride, it was gratitude. After a short break, all the finalists were called to the main stage. The teacher walked up to the microphone again, this time looking calmer. "Today we witnessed something special," she began. "Talent can be taught, but passion cannot. There are many ways to play the piano, but only a few ways to truly touch people's hearts." She paused, looking straight at the boy. "And today, one performance reminded us of why music matters." The boy's heart raced as she continued speaking, but he tried to keep his face calm. When she finally announced the winners, his name wasn't called for the top prize. For a brief moment he felt a sting of disappointment, but it quickly faded when the teacher spoke again. "There is one performer we would like to recognize with a special mention," she said. "Someone who reminded us that music is not just sound, it's feeling. We call it the Spirit of Music Award." She looked directly at him. "And it goes to him." The hall erupted in applause again as he walked to the stage. The teacher handed him a small golden plaque. Her expression was warm now, no trace of the coldness from before. "You have something rare," she said quietly. "Don't ever lose it." He nodded, speechless. The moment felt unreal. He hadn't won the competition, but in his heart it felt like he had won something greater. He had earned respect. After the ceremony, people came to him. Students, journalists, even other contestants. They asked him about his background, his training, his inspiration. When he told them he had taught himself on an old piano at the community center, many of them were surprised. One of the contestants, who had barely noticed him before, said, softly, "You gave me chills when you played." Later that evening, the teacher approached him again backstage. "I want to offer you something," she said. "A place in my music program. Full scholarship. You need proper guidance, and I think you're ready for it." He looked at her, stunned. "You mean, you'd teach me?" She nodded. "Yes, if you want it." He could barely speak. "Thank you," he whispered. "I'd be honored." His mother, standing nearby, covered her mouth with her hands. She couldn't hold back her tears. The teacher smiled faintly. "You've earned it," she said before walking away. That night, as they left the hall, the city lights seemed brighter than ever. The rain had stopped, and the streets glistened under the glow of street lamps. He walked quietly beside his mother, still trying to process everything. "You see?" she said softly. "Dreams don't belong to those who have everything. They belong to those who never give up." He smiled and nodded, looking up at the night sky. Somewhere deep inside, he knew this was just the beginning. The world had finally noticed him, not because of money, fame, or luck, but because of the music that came from his heart. When they reached their hotel, he sat by the piano again, touching the keys softly. He didn't play anything big or grand, just a small melody, simple and pure, the kind his father would have loved. As the notes floated in the quiet room, his mother watched from the doorway, smiling through her tears. The boy didn't know where his journey would lead next, but he knew one thing for sure: he would keep playing no matter where life took him, because music was not just something he did, it was who he was. The next morning, the boy woke up with sunlight pouring through the window. It was warm and bright, and for the first time in days, he felt calm. The noise of the city outside was softer now, like the world was giving him a quiet moment to breathe. His mother was still asleep, tired from the long night before, so he moved quietly to the little desk by the window and looked at the golden plaque that sat in front of him. The words, "Spirit of Music Award," were written in small, shiny letters. He touched them gently, still not quite believing that it was real. Everything that had happened the day before felt like a dream. The applause, the teacher's change of heart, the offer of a scholarship. It was all too much for someone who had spent his whole life in a small town, playing on an old piano no one cared about. He sat there for a long time, remembering the sound of the audience clapping, the way people's faces had changed when he started to play. For so long he had felt invisible. Now people were listening. When his mother woke up, she looked at him and smiled. "You didn't sleep, did you?" she asked softly. He laughed a little. "No, I was just thinking." She walked over, placed her hands on his shoulders and said, "I'm proud of you, my son. You played with your heart, and that's what touched them." He looked at her with gratitude. "I wish Dad could have seen it," he whispered. She nodded, eyes filling with quiet emotion. "He did," she said. "He's watching you. Always." Later that morning, they went to meet the teacher who had offered him the scholarship. The music academy was huge and beautiful, filled with the sound of students practicing in different rooms. Everywhere he looked, there were grand pianos, violins, and young people moving with a kind of confidence that both impressed and scared him. The teacher was waiting for them in her office. Her expression was serious, but there was a calm kindness in her eyes this time. "I meant what I said yesterday," she told him. "You have something special. It's rare to see someone play with that kind of honesty, but raw talent isn't enough. You need discipline, you need to learn the foundation if you want to stand tall." He nodded quickly. "I'm ready to work hard," he said. "I know you are," she said. "You wouldn't be here otherwise." Then she looked at his mother. "The scholarship will cover everything: lessons, housing, even travel for performances. He'll have to move here, but he'll be in good hands." His mother was quiet for a moment. It wasn't easy to let her son go, but she knew this was his dream. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "He's always wanted this." The teacher smiled faintly. "Dreams are only the beginning. What matters is what he does with them." The next few weeks were the start of a completely new life for him. He moved into the academy's dormitory where other young musicians stayed. His mother visited when she could, but mostly he was on his own now. It felt strange at first, waking up in a new place, surrounded by strangers, hearing music all the time. Some students were friendly, curious about the boy who had no formal training but managed to impress the strict teacher. Others kept their distance, thinking maybe he didn't belong there. He didn't mind. He wasn't there to compete with anyone. He was there to learn. His daily routine was tough. Classes started early, and every hour was filled with lessons, music, theory, sight reading, rhythm training, and long hours of piano practice. His hands would ache, and sometimes his head hurt from trying to memorize everything. There were moments when he felt overwhelmed, sitting alone at night staring at the sheet music, wondering if he had made a mistake coming here. But every time, he thought about quitting. He remembered the sound of applause, his mother's proud face, and his father's voice telling him to keep going. That memory gave him strength. The teacher pushed him harder than anyone else. She didn't treat him like a favorite just because she had chosen him. If anything, she expected more from him. During lessons, she would stop him often. Too much. Emotion, she'd say. Control it. Or, that note is not clear enough. Play it again. Sometimes he would play the same short piece 20 times until it sounded perfect. It was frustrating, but he never complained. He knew she was right. Passion was important, but skill was what made passion shine. Slowly, he began to notice the change in himself. His fingers moved faster, his timing was sharper, his understanding of music deeper. One afternoon, while practicing alone in one of the smaller rooms, the teacher quietly entered. He didn't notice at first. He was too focused on a difficult piece she had given him earlier that week. When he finally realized she was there, he stopped and stood quickly. "I'm sorry," he said nervously. "I didn't see you." She raised a hand. "Don't apologize," she said. "Keep playing. I want to hear you finish." He sat down again and continued. The melody filled the room, smooth, delicate, and full of quiet feeling. When he finished, she nodded slowly. "Better," she said. "You've learned to balance heart and control." He smiled shyly. "I've been trying to remember what you said." "I can tell," she said. Then, after a pause, she added, "You remind me of someone I once taught, a boy who played like you from the heart. He didn't have much, but his music touched people. He didn't believe in himself either, not until he learned discipline. I think you have the same spark, her." Words meant more than any applause. He thanked her softly, and she simply said, "Keep going. Don't let comfort slow you down. You've only just started climbing." Then she left. And he sat there for a long time, thinking about how far he had come, and how far he still had to go. Months passed, seasons changed, his skill grew, and so did his confidence. He began performing at small recitals in the academy, then later at bigger ones in the city. Each time he played, more people came to listen. Some said there was something different about him, that his music had warmth, a feeling that reached beyond technique. He knew it came from his past, from the pain and love that had shaped him. The teacher continued to guide him, strict as ever, but also proud. Sometimes after performances, she would quietly nod at him from the back of the hall, and that small gesture meant everything. One evening, she told him that an international event was coming, a concert where top students from around the world would perform. It was the kind of opportunity that could change his life. "I want you to be part of it," she said. His heart raced. "Me?" "Yes," she said, "but it won't be easy. You'll be on stage with the best. I chose you not because you're perfect, but because you have something they don't, a story in your sound." He trained harder than ever after that. Every day, from morning to night, he practiced. His fingers sometimes felt numb, but he kept going. The teacher watched his progress with quiet pride, though she rarely said it aloud. When the day of the international concert arrived, he stood backstage, heart beating fast. The hall was filled with hundreds of people, musicians, critics, and teachers from all over the world. The same teacher who had once doubted him was now his mentor, standing beside him before he went on. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Remember what I told you," she said. "Don't play for them. Play for yourself. Play for what you believe in." He nodded. "I will." When he walked onto the stage, the lights were blinding, but he didn't feel afraid anymore. He sat at the grand piano, the same kind of piano he had once only dreamed of touching. The silence before he started felt deep and powerful. He took a breath and began to play. The music flowed out of him like it had always been waiting. Every note carried a piece of his life. The nights at the community center, his mother's voice, his father's memory, the struggles, and the moments of joy. The hall was silent except for the piano, the sound rising and falling like a living thing. As the final note faded, the silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Then came the applause, louder and longer than ever before. People stood again, clapping and cheering. The teacher was among them, her eyes shining with pride. He stood and bowed, overwhelmed. It wasn't about the applause anymore. It was about what the music meant to him, what it meant to share something real with the world. After the performance, as he walked off the stage, the teacher met him with a quiet smile. "You've done it," she said softly. "You found your voice." He smiled back, tears in his eyes. "Thank you for believing in me." "I didn't believe in you at first," she said honestly, "but you showed me why I should." He laughed quietly. "Then I guess we both learned something." She nodded. "Yes, we did." That night, as he and his mother sat together after the concert, the city lights reflected in the glass walls of the hall. He looked at the stars above and thought about how far he had come. From the small town with an old piano to a stage where the whole world listened, it felt like a miracle. But he knew this wasn't the end. It was only another beginning. He still had more to learn, more to give, and more to share. And as long as there was music in his heart, he knew he would never stop playing. After the big concert, life changed in ways the boy never imagined. People started talking about him everywhere. His performance video was shared online, and thousands of comments poured in. Some called him a musical genius, while others said his story inspired them to keep believing in themselves. For a boy who once felt invisible, it was strange seeing so many people know his name. But even with all the attention, he stayed humble. He knew fame could fade, but the love for music, that had to stay. The teacher noticed how quickly his popularity grew. Reporters wanted interviews, schools invited him for special events, and music companies even sent offers. But she always reminded him, fame is not the goal, growth is. He listened. He didn't care much for fame. He still practiced, every day like nothing had changed. The piano was still his world, the one place where everything made sense. Months passed and he continued his studies at the academy. He became one of the top students not just because of talent but because of his discipline. He was known for arriving early to practice and staying late when everyone else had gone. There were days when he was exhausted, but he still played. He believed every small step mattered. The teacher often watched from a distance, proud but silent. She didn't want him to become comfortable. She wanted him to keep pushing. One afternoon, she called him into her office. Her tone was serious, the kind that meant something important was coming. When he entered, she handed him an envelope. "What's this?" he asked curiously. "An invitation," she said. "There's an international piano competition in Europe. The best young musicians from different countries will be there. I think you should take part." He froze for a second. "Europe," he repeated softly. "That's far." "Yes," she said. "And that's exactly why you should go. You've grown so much here, but now you need to see the world beyond these walls. You need to learn how to perform where no one knows you." He hesitated. The thought of competing with the world's best scared him. "What if I'm not ready?" he asked quietly. She looked straight at him. "You'll never feel ready," she said. "That's why the brave ones go anyway." He thought about it for a while. That night he called his mother and told her everything. She was quiet for a moment and then said, "If your heart tells you to go, then you must go. I'll miss you, but I know you were meant for this." Her voice was full of warmth and pride. That gave him the courage he needed. 2 weeks later, he was on a plane for the first time in his life. The view from the window amazed him. The clouds looked like soft mountains, and the endless blue sky made him realize how big the world truly was. When he arrived, everything felt different, the language, the food, the air. But one thing remained the same: music. It connected people even when words didn't. The competition was being held in a grand old concert hall that looked like something out of a painting. Huge chandeliers hung from the ceiling and the stage gleamed under golden lights. Musicians from all over the world had gathered, each one dressed perfectly, each carrying an air of confidence. He felt small among them, like he didn't belong. But then he remembered his teacher's words. The brave ones go anyway. The next few days were full of rehearsals. He watched the other performers closely. Some were technically perfect, playing with precision and strength. Others were emotional, pouring their souls into every note. He realized that each one had their own story, just like him. That thought calmed him. He didn't have to be like them. He only had to be himself. When his turn came, he felt his heartbeat echoing in his chest. The host called his name and the hall went quiet. He walked to the piano, his steps slow but steady. He sat down, took a deep breath, and let his fingers touch the keys. For a moment, he closed his eyes and thought of everything that brought him here, the long nights of practice, his teacher's tough lessons, his mother's sacrifices. And then he began to play. The piece he chose was one he had written himself, something that came from his heart. It started softly, like a whisper, then grew into something deep and powerful. The audience listened silently, drawn into the emotion in his music. Every note told a story of struggle, of hope, of love that never gave up. When the final note faded into the air, the hall stayed silent for a few seconds. Then suddenly applause filled the room. He stood up slowly, overwhelmed. People were clapping, some even standing. He could see tears in a few eyes. It was more than he ever hoped for. When he bowed, he wasn't bowing just for himself. It was for his teacher, his mother, and everyone who believed in him. After the performance, the judges called him for a short talk. One of them, an older man with kind eyes, said, "You reminded us what music truly is. It's not about perfection, it's about connection. You have that gift. Don't ever lose it." He didn't win the first prize that day, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that people remembered his name and his music. He received invitations to perform in other places, and suddenly his journey began to open in ways he never imagined. When he returned home, the teacher was waiting for him in the academy's hall. She didn't ask how it went. She could tell from his face. "You did well," she said simply. He smiled. "I didn't win." She nodded. "Winning doesn't matter. You grew. That's the real victory." He laughed softly. "That's exactly what you'd say." She smiled faintly. "Because it's true." As time went on, his life became busier. He traveled to more countries, performed in more halls, and met people who admired his work. But no matter where he went, he never forgot where he started. Sometimes he would visit his old town quietly, walking through the streets, looking at the old community center where he first played that broken piano. He'd sit on the same bench outside, close his eyes, and remember the sound of those first, clumsy notes. It reminded him that greatness comes from humble beginnings. The teacher continued to guide him from afar. Even when they didn't talk for weeks, he still followed her lessons in his mind. She had taught him that music was not just a sound. It was a way of speaking to the world without words. One evening, after another successful performance in a big city, he got a message that left him silent. The teacher was ill. She had kept it quiet for a long time because she didn't want anyone to worry. Without thinking twice, he canceled all his upcoming shows and took the first train back to see her. When he reached her house, she was sitting by the window, weak but smiling. "You didn't have to come," she said softly. "I did," he replied. "You're the reason I am who I am." She looked at him for a long moment. "You were always meant to be who you are," she said. "I just helped you see it." He sat by her side and they talked for hours, about music, life, and all the moments they had shared at the academy. At one point, she asked him to play something. There was a small piano in the corner, old and slightly out of tune, but it didn't matter. He played the same piece he had performed at the international competition, the one he wrote himself, as a... The notes filled the room. The teacher closed her eyes. When he finished, she said quietly, "That's how I'll remember you. Not as a student, but as an artist." He took her hand gently. "You'll always be part of my music," he said. She smiled faintly. Then my work is done. That was the last time they spoke face to face. A few weeks later, she passed away peacefully. It broke his heart, but her lessons stayed with him forever. He decided to honor her in the best way he knew, through music. He organized a concert, in her name, inviting her students, old and new, to perform. The hall was full of emotion that night. When it was his turn to play, he stepped up to the piano and looked up for a moment, imagining she was there, watching from the back row like she always did. Then he played with everything he had. The music was full of love and gratitude. It wasn't sad, it was beautiful, filled with the warmth of everything she had taught him. When the last note faded, the entire hall stood in silence. No one clapped at first, they just sat there, feeling the weight and beauty of what they had heard. Then, slowly, applause began, soft at first, then growing louder and louder until the whole hall was filled with sound. As he bowed, he felt tears in his eyes. It wasn't from sadness, it was from love. He realized that music was more than a dream. It was a way to keep people alive in memory. The teacher was gone, but through every note he played, she still lived on. That night, when he stepped outside, the air was cool and calm. The stars shone brightly above him. He closed his eyes and whispered a quiet thank you, to her, to his mother, and to the piano that had given his life meaning. He knew there were still many roads ahead, many stages to play on, and many lessons to learn. But no matter where he went, he would always carry her voice in his heart, reminding him to play not for fame, not for others, but for the truth within the music itself. Years passed after that unforgettable concert held in the teacher's honor, and life took the young pianist to places he had only dreamed about as a child. He became a well-known figure in the music world, performing in countries he once couldn't even find on a map. His name appeared in magazines, and his performances sold out halls wherever he went. Yet, even with all the success, fame never changed the quiet boy who had once played on a broken piano in a small town. Inside, he remained the same, gentle, humble, and full of gratitude. He traveled so often that hotel rooms began to feel like temporary homes. Each time he arrived in a new city, the first thing he would do was find a piano and practice, no matter how tired he was. Music was still his way of breathing, his way of staying grounded. Sometimes, between shows, he would sit alone and think about his journey, the little boy who used to dream, the mother who worked day and night, and the teacher who had pushed him to become more than he thought he could be. Those memories reminded him why he started in the first place. But the more he grew, the more he realized that talent and success also came with responsibility. The world looked up to him now. Young students sent him letters saying his story gave them hope. Some came from poor families, saying they too wanted to learn music but had no one to teach them. Each letter touched his heart deeply because he saw himself in them. He remembered how it felt to have a dream that seemed out of reach. One evening, after a long concert tour, he sat by the window of his apartment overlooking the quiet city lights. The soft glow of the streets below reminded him of his old town. That night, he made a decision that would change his life once again. He decided to build a place for children who had dreams but no means, a place where anyone could learn music, no matter how rich or poor they were. It took him months to plan, and he used most of his savings to start it. He didn't care about the money. He only cared about the purpose. When the Music Academy finally opened, it wasn't huge or fancy. It was built in a quiet neighborhood, filled with simple classrooms, a few instruments, and bright walls that carried the energy of new beginnings. He called it Harmony House. The day it opened, dozens of children arrived, some shy, some excited, holding their parents' hands tightly. Their eyes lit up as they touched the pianos, guitars, and violins for the first time. The sight filled his heart with emotion. He walked around, greeting each student, remembering how nervous he once felt when he first entered a real music school. He promised himself that none of these children would ever feel unwelcome the way he once did. He became their teacher, but more importantly, their friend. He told them stories of how he learned music, how he failed, how he practiced, and how even after all these years, He was still learning. He taught them that mistakes were part of growth, and that music wasn't about being perfect, it was about being honest. Every day at Harmony House was filled with laughter, music, and the sound of small fingers learning big dreams. Sometimes, he would sit at the piano while the children gathered around him. He would play softly and they would listen with wide eyes, as if the notes carried magic. For him, it was the purest happiness he had ever known. But not everything was easy. Running the academy took time, energy, and money. There were times when he struggled to keep things going. Some people told him to close it down and return to performing full-time. They said he was wasting his fame on teaching, but he didn't. Listen, he knew that success meant nothing if it wasn't shared. He told himself, if my music can change even one child's life, it's worth everything. One day, while teaching a small group of students, he noticed a young girl sitting quietly, in the back. She looked about 8 years old, her clothes simple, her eyes full of curiosity. When he asked her if she wanted to try playing the piano, she shook her head and said softly, "I don't think I can." He smiled and told her, "That's what I used to think too. Come, sit here." He guided her hands to the keys and showed her how to press them gently. The first few notes sounded clumsy, but her eyes widened with wonder. "See?" he said with a grin. "The piano doesn't care who you are. It only listens to your heart." From that day, the girl came every day to practice. She was quiet but determined. She reminded him so much of himself that sometimes it brought tears to his eyes. Slowly, her playing improved, and soon she could perform simple melodies beautifully. Watching her grow filled him with pride. He often thought, "This is why I built this place." A few years passed and the academy grew. More teachers joined, more instruments were donated, and more children found hope there. The young girl he had taught from the beginning became one of the best students. She started performing at small local events and people were amazed by her talent. When she played, he could see the same fire in her that he once had, the same hunger to express herself through music. One evening, after a long day, he sat in the empty classroom. The piano was still warm from the lessons earlier. He began playing a slow tune, something soft and full of memories. As he played, he thought of his teacher again, the one who had changed his life with both her strictness and her kindness. He realized that he had become what she once was, a guide, a mentor, a believer in the power of others. He smiled to himself. The circle had come full. That night, as he locked up the academy, a thought came to him, something he hadn't done in a long time. He decided to perform again, but not for fame or money. This time he would perform for his students. He wanted them to see that dreams never end, that even after achieving so much, there is always more to learn, more to share, more to give. He announced the idea to his students, and they were thrilled. The concert would be held in the same hall, where he had first played years ago, the one where the teacher had once challenged him. Returning there felt emotional. It was like coming home after a lifetime. On the night of the concert, the hall was packed. The front rows were filled with his students, their families, and teachers from the academy. His mother, now older but still strong, sat proudly in the front seat. When he walked onto the stage, the crowd erupted in applause. He bowed gently, his eyes scanning the audience until they rested on the smiling faces of the children he had taught. He sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and began to play. The music flowed like a river, carrying pieces of every chapter of his life. The struggles, the lessons, the victories, and the love. It was more than just a performance. It was a story, told through sound. The audience listened in silence, their hearts moving with every note. Halfway through, he paused and looked up. "This music," he said softly, "is for everyone who ever felt small, who ever thought their dreams were too far away. I was one of you once, but I learned that as long as you keep believing, the music will find its way." Then he played the last part, a gentle melody that rose and fell like a heartbeat. When it ended, there was a stillness in the air so deep that it almost felt sacred. Then the applause came, louder than he had ever heard before. He stood, tears in his eyes, and bowed deeply. Among the cheers, he saw his students clapping and smiling, their faces full of admiration. At that moment, he realized something beautiful. The same way his teacher had once inspired him, he was now inspiring others. The chain would continue, from one heart to another, from one generation to the next. After the concert, he went backstage, where his mother hugged him tightly. "You've done what you were meant to do," she whispered. He smiled, his eyes full of peace. "I think I finally understand what music really means," he said. Years later, as time passed and his hair began to turn gray, he continued teaching. He no longer performed for big audiences, but every day he played for his students. The world still remembered him as a famous pianist, but to the children who came to Harmony House, he was simply Sir, the kind teacher who believed in them. One quiet evening, as the sun set and the classroom filled with a golden glow, he sat at the same piano and began to play the old melody again, the one his teacher had once made him practice endlessly. As the notes drifted through the room, he smiled. Somewhere deep inside, he felt that she was listening. Music had carried him through poverty, doubt, loss, and joy. It had given him purpose and peace. And now, it had given him something even greater, the power to give others hope. When the Ijusar final note faded, he closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Outside, the children's laughter echoed through the halls, blending with the sound of the piano. Life, like music, continued to move, soft, beautiful, and endless.